Welcome and thank you for tuning in to Redefining Jazz and Social Justice in the Era of Black Lives Matter. This is part two of a three-panel series, Jazz in the Era of Black Lives Matter, curated by myself and Naomi Extra. You can learn more about the panels to come on the National Jazz Museum of Harlem website. And we want to hear your thoughts and questions, so please feel free to tweet. And when you do tweet, please use the hashtag Jazz in the Era of BLM. The idea for this series came out of a series of conversations that my wife and I had began having back in 2012 after Trayvon Martin was killed, and then again in 2014 when Mike Brown was murdered by the police and left on the streets. We paid attention to some of the organizing that was emerging in places like Florida and Chicago and New York, and we began to talk about how to connect conversations about social justice to some of the concepts that inform the Black Lives Matter movement. Um, and we found that too often conversations around jazz and social justice was completely ignored or was disengaged from Black Lives Matter. So for today's panel, we want to explore some of the most pressing issues that deals with redefining jazz music within the context of the movement for Black Lives. Dr. Shana L. Redmond is a public-facing scholar and the author of Anthem, Social Movements and the Sound of Solidarity in the African Diaspora, and Everything Man, The Form and Function of Paul Robeson. In 2019, she contributed the liner essay to the vinyl soundtrack release to the Jordan Peele film, Us. And she is a professor of musicology and African American studies at UCLA. We have also with us tenor saxophonist and composer J.D. Allen. He's a prolific composer and band leader, and he's a winner of Downbeat, Jazz Times, and NPR polls in categories including NPR's Best Jazz Musician of the Year, Tenor Saxophonist of the Year, Composer of the Year, and Rising Star of the Year. He's also performed and recorded and toured with legends such as Lester Bowie, Betty Carter, Cindy Blackman, and Michelle Indelicello, just to name a few. We also have with us Bertha Hope, who is one of jazz's living legends. She's a pianist, composer, and educator. Bertha Hope has toured globally with artists such as Nat Adderley, Dizzy Gillespie, Eddie Henderson, and has recorded several albums under her own leadership. In 2018, she won the National Jazz Museum in Harlem's Legends of Jazz Award, and she has also worked tirelessly to keep the legacy of her late husband, Elmo Hope, alive. We also have with us bassist Russell Hall, composer. He is a Emmy, Grammy, and Golden Globe nominated jazz artist from Kingston, Jamaica. He's worked with legends such as Edward Norton, Kathleen Battle, Wynton and Bradford Marsalis, Barry Harris, Harlan Riley, Dee Dee Bridgewater, and also has performed with Wenzel and the Shakes, Emmett Cohen, Jonathan Baptiste, and Stay Human. We also are happy to have with us Duduzo Maktahini, who's an award-winning pianist, improviser, healer, and scholar from South Africa. He is a recipient of prestigious awards such as the Standard Bank Young Artist Award, South African Music Award, and others. He has 9 albums under his belt, with his latest album being Modes of Communication, Letters from the Underworlds on Blue Note Records. As an academic, Maktahini is heading a music department at the University of Fort Hare, while completing his PhD at Stellenbosch University. His works moves between jazz and improvisation while making connections to African cosmological aspects with a strong focus on ritual. So those are our panelists for today.
All right. So as Jerome, we'll just get right into it. So one of the things that we've been interested in doing with this series, as Jerome has mentioned, is thinking about jazz within the context of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I want to just start with a broad question for each of you. For each of your perspectives, what is distinct about this moment? And I'm thinking about, we've there's jazz music from different eras, from civil rights, from Black Power. But what's kind of distinct um, about this moment of Black Lives Matter, and what does it demand of you in particular as artists, thinkers, intellectuals? Um, so, if it's okay, I'd love to start with Shana.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I think there are some things that are interesting or distinct about this moment. I think there are a lot of things that have remained the same, or at least remained relatively the same. It's, Amiri Baraka's notion of the changing same, that we've inherited a lot of instances or dynamics that we're familiar with. We know what violence looks like. We know what dispossession looks like. We know what authoritarianism and fascism looks like. And a lot of that we feel and know today as we've felt and known it before. So, in some ways, this moment is not entirely distinct. But I think because of the ways in which the movement formations and the cultures around these social movements have formed is somewhat distinct. I think there's the element of social media, of course, that is made for a different type of collectivizing, that people are able to kind of immediately touch each other in some virtual sense, if not a physical sense. And that's been an opportunity for gathering, for like-minded people to actually think aloud about what the present is and what our needs are. I think that's also been a different opportunity for our musicians. So being able to have new music in real time, right? We're missing, unfortunately, the kineticism that comes with being in the same place at the same time with our musicians, which matters tremendously. And I wish for us to get to, I hope for us to get to that moment again very, very soon, because it's urgent. But being able to catch a download the night it drops and be in community with people who are listening to it at the same time, who are feeling similar feelings, who are then using it the very next day in their rallies, in their protests, in their teaching, in their communications with their friends, and sharing it through social media so that it has as wide a berth as possible. I think that's unique about our moment, and there's some real power to it. So just as much as we might be feeling similarly about kind of this political moment, I think the techniques that we might get there, the techniques we use to actually explain it or feel our way through it, are innovative and are not only bridging us across city or state, but around the world, right? Being able to touch people who are many, many thousands of miles away from us, and being able to share in those stories, right? The fees must fall in South Africa, linking with the movements that are happening in the US around access to education, about cops off campus, about all of these things that are happening in the ways in which we see ourselves in concert with each other. This moment, I think, is making a lot more of that possible, and it's really powerful.
Thank you for that. How about JD?
Okay. I echo those sentiments also. I think we have, I know that we have a very useful tool in our midst, and that is technology. Being able to talk to brothers and sisters all over the world in different time zones at the same time, and being able to organize. And I believe that what makes this moment unique is COVID-19, because we're given the opportunity to focus and take a step back and figure out what's the next move as a unit that we all should take together. It's as simple as that for me. That's what makes this time very unique, and hopefully we will take advantage of that.
I agree with that, JD. This is a very interesting and special moment in our history and time with technology. What about you? What about you, Bertha Hope? Miss Hope, what you think?
I agree with JD. I think there's a pause that we didn't ask for that's been caused by the pandemic, and that is multiplied by our heightened emotional state over all of the things that are happening to Black people in terms of violence and outright murder that has no compensation. We haven't addressed that those are all things that I think that we need to think about in a collective way. I think this is a real opportunity. As JD said, we can talk to people from all over the world. One thing that I would like to see emerge from the kind of use of time that we have now and technology is to really think along the lines of something that protects us as a group of musicians who have been neglected along the same lines as we've been neglected in any other part of our social fabric. Jazz has been sorely neglected in its home. And there we have so many outlets now to reach to see how many people might be able to come to some collective idea about the things that are missing for us that we could unify because we have a different sense of time and space right now. There's a kind of collective pause where we have to use technology in a different way and where we're occupying space in a different way. We don't have the exchange of audiences to play for. We're playing in a different kind of reality. But I really think that if we can reach enough like-minded people, we may be able to get a real foundation, a collective foundation for ownership, for control of the music that we make every day and watch it get stolen every day.
Does anyone want to add anything to that? Russell, Duduzo?
I'll just jump in here, kind of echoing what, Mrs. Hope and the other speakers have said. I think, one thing of community is that we now live in a world where there are two communities. There's the virtual community, and then there's the physical world community that we're all a part of. And though it's been I think because we've all been in a quarantine and we've all been in a place where we're unable to even go out to a restaurant and just order some food, and we were in a period of time like that, it's almost like everything burst out at the seams in like May with all the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all these, Sean Reed, all these different people that were killed around the same amount of time. I mean, Breonna was back in March, which is heinous to think about, but everyone being in quarantine, being in isolation, especially if you don't have a significant other, a lot of family around. I know musicians that didn't see their family for 7 months because of, the health crisis and all that's going on. You put that in urban areas, you put that in situations that are already exacerbated by the racial divide, by the social divide. It's you're going to see the eruption that has happened of the protests. Unfortunately, there's been rioting and all of that stuff, but there also has been, the blessing of music, the blessing of art, the blessing of uplift and joy through the protest and through the voice of action. Jerome and I have been out in the street and we've seen the effect that the music has on people, and it changes the atmosphere of a march from being a riot to a celebration or a party, and it's looked at with just a different set of eyes. That, in addition to how exacerbated the isolation of quarantine has been, I think people are just ready to bust out and say, no, this is the time, and this is when we need to act. This is enough. You've taken all of our rights. You've taken our right to so many things. Now is our time to say no. Now is our time to say this is enough. And especially with the younger generation, seeing the multitude of generations together in the street, people that are more at risk, risking their own lives for COVID, for this racial upheaval, so to speak. You know, young people taking their cues from the previous generations of people. And I think it's also always, every movement is always supplemented by some kind of artistic movement as well. And we're seeing it. It's the conglomerate of the entire diaspora coming upon itself. You know, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-American, African, everything coming into one.
Duzo, speak to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me once again. I think I definitely agree with all the panelists. I mean, most of what they've been saying is things that I've been thinking about, things that I've been seeing, and things that I've been making attempts to translate to sound. But one thing in particular that has been, you know, unique about this time, especially here in South Africa, I guess for artists, has been the very collapse of the systems that in many ways we've always imagined as being there to protect us or look after us. So in this moment, we realize that all of this had been an illusion. But again, like my sister was saying, that, like, you know, even with Fees Must Fall campaigns, with the decolonization of the curriculum, with Rose Must Fall, and all of these movements, you know, since 2010, we've just been seeing that, like, you know, these systems have always been a minute away from collapsing anyway. So there's a particular way in which then the sound has been, you know, transformed because of this kind of, well, I wouldn't say realization, but now we really know, so to speak. And that comes with the response of the collective. I think now more than any other time, we realize how much, you know, important community is. And like everyone has been saying, the cyberspace has shown us that it's possible to connect in these kind of ways. But also, I think it's just like, you know, a way to come back to ourselves. You know, within the continent, we have this idea that has been misused in many contexts, this idea of Ubuntu, but it's really based on a communal idea of being in the world. So you realize that, like, you know, in this moment, Black people are on their own in a big way. And you feel that in the streets in South Africa. We've always felt it, but something has to be said about the illusions of the post-1994, the democratic sort of moment. And we realize that there is no rainbow, you know, and that Black people have to create a rainbow by themselves, for themselves. So these has been, for me, at least these are some of the things that, like, you know, our community here in South Africa, you know, around the jazz sonics have been trying to really be more deliberate about, and not only to document them in the sound, but how sound speaks directly to these things, and how this art form speaks directly and has a kind of confrontational kind of aspect to it, as opposed to we documenting the time, but we actually in the time.
We want to cut actually right now to a video, a piece by Duduzo entitled Rituals of Invocation.
And then afterwards, I'd like to think more about this sound, right? That Duduzo that you've referred to, and that, you know, all of you have thought about through your work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
Duduzo, that was bad, man.
Yeah, brother.
Goodness.
Oh, thank you so much.
That was high octane, bro.
Oh man, thank you.
Can you
Like it should be.
yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that piece a bit and its meaning,
Yeah,
title, and
yeah. So I think it's again like, I was trying to look into this idea of thinking with the sonics and thinking from the sonics. And how do we start engaging the sonics, not only as a backdrop, but living with the sound, so to speak. And so the title of the concert was Rituals of Invocations. And in a sense, I was trying to look at like four movements and trying to locate where we are as humanity. So like you said earlier on, I'm really passionate about like African cosmology and how it's really our freedom. This like way of seeing, way of being in the world that is anchored on a pre-colonial sort of thought. So within the idea of ritual, then it goes through like four movements. And normally the first movement is preparation, and which is like what Coltrane and all our foremothers and forefathers had been doing, to this moment of invocation, So invocation then looks into the idea of a God, like where do we seek help? And this is where the idea of a mother then comes in. From there, then it goes to a healing phase. And, you know, there's so many ways we could think about healing, but also we could think about healing as not the removal of pain completely, but there's a way in which pain gets stored somewhere, and there's a way in which pain knows how to find us, and especially Black people. And then the last movement looks into this idea of rebirth. So then how I locate this song in this piece is the song is called Abantwana Belanga, which means the children of the sun. And it was also just like looking perhaps at chematic knowledge as maybe a way out, as like, how do we organize then as Black people? There's a way in which like these systems, like I said in the beginning, have failed us. So what are our own systems? What is it that we have in like Black memory that is left? Because that's really the question. So then I was thinking about this idea of the children of the sun, that like wherever we are in this displacement, which, you know, has given birth to this art form anyway, but there are many forms of displacement. Even within the continent, there's been so many forms of displacement, from forced removals, Black people being pushed out of the cities, and Black people going into exile as well. So I try to think about the sun as the center, as this like collective memory. And I try to think of the sonic as emerging out of the sun. So, you know, the sun is kind, and from wherever we are, even in our displacement, this is what connects us with home in a way. So basically, those were some of my thoughts around the piece.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to pick up on, you mentioned this question of how do we organize, and I want to pick up on that thread. And so, JD, Russell, Bertha, you all have been doing so much in terms of organizing. And Shana, I know I'm a big fan of Anthem. And so I'm kind of really eager to hear both about both your present work, but also the work that you've done historicizing, kind of organizing around and thinking around anthems. But I want to start with JD. If you could talk to us a little bit about your work around this question of how do we organize, but both musically, what you're doing in your music, and Jerome, you know, has thoughts and, you know, about that too, and also what you're doing with the We Insist Collective.
Oh, okay. In the music, I like to think that I lead with the subconscious, because I realized that music for me was a form of escapism, a way out of situations that could change my life. Starting way back when I started playing professionally when I was 14 in Detroit, Michigan. And I grew up on the east side of Detroit. It was where historically is where the 1967 riots happened. So I grew up seeing burned out buildings. And for the longest, I thought that's how every city was in America until basically I left. So in my mind's eye, music was a way of time travel or travel in a sense. So when I'm playing, I'm not thinking of in the conscience, you know, my conscience in terms of I'm doing this for this motive. I try to just be open, and the thing that is actively going on is probably listening, you know. And I like to think of everything that I play as actually the blues, even if it's no changes, it's a form of the blues. If it's not with notes, then it's with the sounds. That's as far as I go. But in terms of organizing, I won't call myself an organizer or anything like that. I think I'm just being a good Samaritan or concerned citizen or a good neighbor. I like that better than organizing for me. And I think my way of going about it is first of all, I think it's very important that Black Americans realize that this is a story that's going on all over the world, not just here. I think we have a tendency to think that it's just this 401 experience, although it might have been probably one of the most brutal, but we are not by ourselves. So with that in mind, I think it's imperative that, and I've tried to adopt this philosophy that, especially with technology, once again, you know, calling a brother or sister in another country, and the fact that we are musicians, you know, that's usually a way to, of an icebreaker, or a way to open the door, and just basically saying, first of all, asking, are there any organizations there that we should probably hook up with? You know, not going into a situation trying to take over, like, join me. No, it's like, let's see what's going on first and see if we can come to an alliance. And I think that's been probably the most productive way of operating. So we've managed to talk to brothers and sisters in South Africa, London. Hopefully we'll get to Jamaica. I'm trying to catch up with Herbie Miller. That's my man. I'm sure he'd be. I went down there last year and I got a chance to hang out in Jamaica for about a week, and a beautiful experience. So I'm sure once I get in touch with Mr. Miller, you know, we probably can get some things going on there. We reached out to brothers and sisters in Chicago, obviously Detroit. I'm from Detroit, Cincinnati, Louisville, Kentucky, and New York, and Canada. So funny thing is, we have a lot in common. I kind of suspected we did, but it's nice to hear that, well, maybe it's not so nice to hear that we're all under the thumb of a lot of people. But like I said before, I think it's an opportunity to say, look, let's figure out what we have, our common goals, and try to move together. So, and with that stance, I think I'm more of a good neighbor or concerned citizen.
Okay. I want to circle back to that and hear more about the We Insist collective, but
yeah, I mean, JD, you always have had pieces in your tune on your recordings that spoke directly to what's happening, and you know, in the last, like, maybe 6 years or so, you've dedicated full albums to these concepts, right, of freedom, and like, you know, specifically, you have a recording, Americana music, musings and jazz and blues and Barcoon. I mean, it's not getting around it. It's directly to it, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to play about something, right? I mean, you have a goal in mind and then you close your eyes. But yeah, Barcoon was specific. 2019 was the 400th anniversary of Black Americans being in the United States. And I felt there was a lot of celebration going on, but I felt that as a Black jazz musician, I should celebrate that. You know, the strength that we had. And Barcoon was a book that I checked out, and I wanted to dedicate feelings, not so much specific compositions, but what I was feeling at that time and before. I didn't know any of this was going to happen. I mean, no one knew that George Floyd was going to die, our version of Emmett Till. But Americana was in reaction to the fact that I read an article in the New York Times about Americana music, and it did not mention the blues. It didn't mention jazz. You know, things that we contributed to, you know, it didn't mention us. So yeah, that was a little bit of a mini protest for myself with the music. You know, when I play my gigs, I don't do a lot of talking because I don't think a lot of people want me to talk. So I just play. But now, enough with not talking, now it's time to talk. Maybe I'm talking about what I was playing all along. Maybe this is what I'm talking about in the conscious, what I play in the subconscious.
Now,
does that make, you know?
Yeah, man, I hear you. Now, Duduzo was talking about community as well, and Bertha, I wanna get with you really quickly. Miss Hope, you have a strong presence in 802, and you always you've had for a while. And could you speak to how important it is? That's the union in New York. The importance of that of that community organizing musicians coming together, particularly this moment that we have right now, that we're in right now, I should say?
My involvement with the movement that came out of 802 was really specifically to work toward jazz musicians being treated equally in terms of the union's pension plan. That was how I really got involved. There have been several attempts to do that, and none of them have really been as successful as they should have been because the union didn't really have teeth in the movement. So the movements petered out quickly. They started and they didn't gain enough traction to really continue. After several starts and after several mishaps involving the legalization of the kind of money that would go into the union for jazz musicians, there were only a very few who were attached to recording, and they were the ones that were able to benefit most, for the most part. Musicians who are working in the clubs were met with fierce resistance by the club owners to take part of the money from the entrance fee and apply it to the union. But before that, the union and the New York State legislature were involved in a way that decimated that movement, and it didn't go forward. So I have to say, consequently, that I have not been as active in that part of it as I should be. I'm still a member of the union, and that particular portion that I was interested in has no teeth again. And so it keeps starting and stopping. It starts and it stops. I think it's going to be up to the more visible younger generations to get in and make the union work for them in ways that make sense for jazz musicians and the way their careers operate. It's not like a symphony orchestra. It's not something that you have where you have one home base or where you travel as a union, as a unit, and go to several places consistently in a touring situation. So, but it is important to make strides there. I have dropped out of that situation, but there are so many generations that have come behind me. They need to get into the union and make it work for them. But it really takes the force of young people, I think, to decide that the union needs to work in their behalf. But that was the part that I spoke of earlier about the collective mind, that now may be a good time for us to be a collective, to force the union to deal with the unique situations that jazz musicians face. So I regret to say that I'm not actively involved in that, but that's not to say that I wouldn't be reactivated if I could connect with a group of people out of all the generations who are becoming much more visible and who can have a little bit more clout if they are organized and with a collective will and with a set of uh, situations they want to see improved. But that takes some organizing inside the, I would say, inside the colleges, the universities, the institutes of music, where we're producing more musicians than we have spaces for them to play. In most cities, no, there isn't much representation on the radio. We're not represented in the numbers that we are producing in television, or it's the internet, it's collective organizations from all of those places to take the union to task about protections, about scales, about monies that no musician should ever accept. So those are a lot of the topics that we need to address, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. There's so many different layers of resistance, right? Unionizing through the music itself. You all are making me think about this. I want to kind of just circle back to kind of the sound of resistance, the sound of this moment, as we can call it that. And I want to bring in Shana and think, in your book Anthem, and feel free to talk about other things, if you want to go somewhere else with this. But one of the things that's really interesting to me about your book is, so Anthem is about, this, what you call in the title, the sound of solidarity throughout the African diaspora. And there's no neat story of, this sound of solidarity, right? And I'm thinking in particular about when you talk about the UNIA and arriving at, Ethiopia as, an anthem that should be used. And so I kind of want to trouble this idea a little bit, like historically and presently, of how these, the sound of resistance or solidarity, how it comes to be in Black music, in jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I'm interested quite often in how music becomes a strategy amongst the African descended. How do we use it as a means of thinking about different futures and organizing each other around a certain set of ideas, but also ideals? What is the vision? What is the horizon in front of us that we might pursue together? And so, of course, from shared oppression, we might also manifest shared dreams. And I believe that music plays a really central role in making that possible. But it's not a utopia. It's imperfect. What to one person sounds like freedom may not sound that way to another person. We have to account for all of the ways in which Blackness is multiple, right? That there is no singular Blackness, that we're coming to these conditions, even if shared, through many different vantage points, whether it be nation or culture or language or economic background, educational background, all of these things that also create moments of contest within Blackness. And so I think part of what was really important to me, even as I was trying to tell a story in Anthem about how we, capital W, became that. How did we become a we? Music was a major part of how we became a we. I also had to be honest about the fact that we didn't all want the same things. We didn't all believe the same things, and that our music also reflected it. So the example you offer with Ethiopia under Garvey's UNIA, it was written in 4-part harmony, and all of the leading lines were delivered by men. The men always sung before the women did. The women were meant to follow behind the men in the performance of the organization's anthem. And it's a moment for us to really pause and think about, well, how are we situating everyone in this organization, is it possible to have equal standing within an organization that so clearly privileges men? And I think we have to still call those questions. My comment to you earlier, Mr. Allen, about your piece, the statement, the manifesto for We Insist, I love that it begins as an intersectional document. It's about race and gender, right? That we have to think about these things together. We have to think also about nation, how we are differently positioned around the world, even as, again, we share similar structures of dispossession. So as much as we want to sometimes have this quick and easy language of Black music being equally liberatory amongst us, it's just not true. It's just not true. And it's not a one size fits all for each of the songs either. You know, some songs are going to be really hot in this moment because they speak to the fire of whatever situation is right in front of me, but some songs are going to become anthems, and each generation is going to learn the words, each generation is going to learn the changes, because that song has staying power, right? So we have to have really fine-tuned hearing practices around how we are positioned in the world and which songs, which pieces, which musicians best represent all of the multiplicities that are inherent in Blackness.
You for that. And this seems like a great moment kind of transition to Russell's video, and then to talk a little bit about, just what you've been doing, what you've been playing, and some of the choices or struggles that have come up around music at marches.
All right, that'll work. Amen.
Hey, if I got this stamp of approval from the great Miss Bertha Hope, I'm good for the day. Thank you.
So can you talk a little bit about music and marches? Because you've been out pounding the pavement like for months. And I'm really curious, I've been to a few of them, or two, and and I'm really curious about what you're playing. I'm curious about this song in particular, and folks feel free to jump in with your thoughts on this song as an anthem, as it kind of plays into this moment. What does it mean to be playing that out at marches? I'd love to hear from all of you, but let's start with Russell. And I also, just want to think about, has there been any struggle with deciding what to play? Russell? I'm also really curious about that.
Well, first, let me just say that, you know, this is a song that has been performed by literally anybody that is familiar with the African diaspora or is a part of the African diaspora. I mean, whether it's in Jamaica, whether it's in South Africa, you know, this is a song, to me, what it represents is the response to the Star Spangled Banner. This is the, you know how it starts with the question, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early? This is the response to that question. You know, it's like, no, we can't see because you've covered our eyes. We can't see. So now we will lift our voice and sing a song full of, you know, the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sorry, I know I'm flipping the lyrics and stuff, but this is the response. This is the moment for people of the diaspora, people that have felt like they have been disenfranchised or looked upon a certain way, just by nature of the color of their skin or whatever, to say, this is what we do in spite of all of this oppression. In terms of how, I think we perform this song at every march, at every rally, at every protest. I think I played this song almost every day since, you know, the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Other songs we've been playing are "We Shall Overcome." We've been playing I'll Fly Away, which is, you know, JD talked about escapism through art. And that's something that I very much relate to, you know, as a young Black man. You feel like you want to fly away. You feel like there's no place for you as I'm not a woman. So I can't, you know, all I can say is this is a time that people of color and women are rising up. And especially with the deaths of John Lewis and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you know, these are the moments in history that are calling people to play these anthems and also create new anthems. And a lot of what we've been doing, we did, the group that I am a co-founder of, with so many other organizers. I mean, I could be on here all day talking about it, but called the Blacksmiths. We've also been working with another group called the Wide Awakes, who have been an abolitionist group since 1860s. And so we've been working with them, and Unite NY, and a large part of what we do is also create an atmosphere where there's unlimited improvisation and people just start their own chants, whether it's no justice, no peace, defund the police, down to Black Lives Matter every day, down to the countdown to, you know, talk about 12. And, you know, there's so many different elements that go into it, because we've created the Great American Songbook, but a large part of the Great American Songbook excludes Duke Ellington and excludes Wayne Shorter and excludes all of these seminal composers at the heat of the century: Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, Mary Lou Williams, all these different people, Lil Hardin Armstrong, you know. And now we're seeing a point where we need to create a songbook. We need to create something that is definitive, that says this is our history, this is our repertoire, this is what we pick from. And now we're picking, and not just people of the 40s and 50s, but Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, all these different composers that are at the peak of artistic genius and vision. And, you know, to kind of bring it back to earth, Lift Every Voice and Sing is quite possibly the most, you know, the most seminal part of that songbook. It's kind of the thing that kicks off all the composition and the musicality and the depth. You know, when it gets to that bridge and you hear you hear that lowered third of the second part of the bridge, that is where we lift. That was where we rise through the music. Sing a song, sing a song. You know, like that is where we are right now in the time of where we are at musically and spiritually. we're lifting out of that darkness into what we see now.
All right. Well, okay. So you said a ton. I want to get, Shana, can you jump in and talk a little bit about, Lift Every Voice, and also just what that song has meant, historically, and if you have thoughts on what it means to play it right now.
Yeah, so Lift Every Voice and Sing was composed at the turn of the 20th century by James Weldon Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson in Jacksonville, Florida. It was meant to commemorate the birth of Abraham Lincoln as celebration, then also in part of their own freedom in the segregated South. And the song was carried for a generation by many, many Black women in particular in the US South, who were teaching it in their segregated schools, in their segregated churches, using it in their particular songbooks, as Russell was discussing, that were meant for very localized communities. And in the early 1920s, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People adopts it as the hymn of the organization. And from there on, it becomes ritualized in the organization functions of the NAACP and continues to be the representative song of that organization. And the song throughout the 20th century, because it had been carried through the oral traditions of the Black community for so long before adoption, has continued to have a foothold in our Black cultural memory in these very profound ways. In some respects, Lift Every Voice and Sing is the song to beat. Like, if you're trying to compose an anthem for Black America, that's the song you have to compare yourself to, right? That's who you have to unseat. And the song has been unseated, or there have been attempts to unseat it throughout the 20th century, particularly by generations later on who decided we need a song that's actually better matching our beliefs, better matching the sound world in which we live, right? So in the early 1970s, the Congress on Racial Equality says, yeah, Lift Every Voice and Sing was cool as the Black national anthem, but we actually want To Be Young, Gifted, and Black by Nina Simone to be the Black national anthem, right? That's what we're choosing. We're adopting that song as our anthem, as the voice of young Black America. So there have been these moments. And then we also have this moment in 1989 with Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, where the film opens with the playing of Lift Every Voice and Sing on a Black screen. And then when it transitions into Rosie Perez fighting with her gloves to open the film, it switches over to Fight the Power. So you have that disruption that's happening too. Fight the Power in that moment was, for Spike Lee, the song that better epitomized Black America, the urban struggle around resources, around education, around police brutality, all of these things. Nonetheless, we're still coming back to Lift Every Voice and Sing. Even if we're seeking to unseat it, we still have to acknowledge it exists. So Lift Every Voice and Sing becomes that song, continues to be that song. Russell's beautiful rendition of it, the constant usage of it at rallies. I've seen multiple iterations of it by Black orchestral and choral ensembles online in the last 6 or 7 months who have revived its performances in their own repertoires as a means of very much taking a broad, long history take on where we are at the current moment. And that's part of what the song does, is to be able to say, we are struggling, not newly, not again, but still. We're still singing this song because we're still facing the types of repressions, but also the types of joys and celebrations that James Weldon Johnson was speaking to in his piece from 1900. So the song has a really entrenched place in Black cultural memory, and I expect it will continue.
Yeah, it's interesting, Shana. You so many artists have taken that and just done the tune, but changed the sonic sound of the music. Ray Charles, Max Roach, Beyonce, Jasmine Horn. So many people.
There was a Renee Marie version of it too. I don't know if you saw this with the Democratic National Convention in 2008, but Renee Marie, a jazz singer from Virginia, originally in Denver, sung the tune of the Star Spangled Banner with the lyrics of Lift Every Voice and Sing. And,
right.
she received death threats, right, Miss Hope? Right? She was like vilified for having, you know, sullied the good name of the Star Spangled Banner, which of course is just a song like any other. And she was taking both songs, merging them together because she said it best represented her citizenship in these United States.
Well, that was a brilliant statement because we do belong here by virtue of the fact that we built this place and have never been able to be compensated for that. So I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, can I say something?
Come on with it.
I hate to be the party pooper. The first time I heard Lift Every Voice and Sing was I was in the 2nd grade, and a beautiful song. I love the melody. I've never heard a bad version of that song. Everyone that I've heard, usually Black people play it, and everyone that I've heard play it, including Russell, it's been played with heartfelt emotion, and I feel like it's genuine. But to me, personally, I think Lift Every Voice and Sing speaks to Dr. Martin Luther King's old version, and it appeases to the white moderate. Personally, I don't want to play Lift Every Voice and Sing because I don't think it did anything for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I hate to be the party pooper, but I don't think
That's
it's
real.
about. I don't think it's
That's
about
real.
Lift Every Voice or even the anthem. I respect the anthem, but I like to think about it in terms of how Paul Robeson dealt with his art form, where he was a symbol of Black excellence and law, opera, or singing, and all these different mediums. He was a symbol of Black excellence, and he used Old Man River as a way to talk to many people all over the world. So is it really about an anthem? Because when I say, when what comes to mind, Lift Every Voice and Sing is, okay, you can protest like this with your voice, but you know, we give this country, we give this world, all over the diaspora, we give this world beautiful music, beautiful rhythms. Is it really about voices at this point? Or is it really about not singing and coming together and figuring out how we can control our own spaces? I mean, we are thinkers, right? We are jazz musicians, we are creatives, we are critical thinkers. So is it about a voice at this point? So I'm sorry to be the party pooper, but I have no desire to play Lift Every Voice to make white liberal America feel comfortable. I just won't do it.
Shana already laid it out. We all don't have to have the same, we don't all have to agree.
I agree with what Shana said. I remember watching Spike Lee's movie Winfrey, and then Rosa Perez was boxing and whatnot. I was with that. That was what got me. Because when I heard Lift Every Voice, I was like, oh yeah, my mother used to sing that. My grandparents sang.
Right.
You know,
right. And I
are.
think that that's precisely what has happened. It has declined in favor at certain points in the latter 20th century because there have been these new songs that have been far more generative for the communities to which they've been launched. And so every generation is my position is every generation has to have its own anthem. And you may still revere Lift Every Voice and Sing. You may still find a place for it in certain performances, but it doesn't have to be your anthem. And I totally agree with you. There's a lot of appeasement that can go along with that song. Certainly in part because it's attached to the NAACP. They were about integration, right? They were about a certain type of respectability politics that just does not resonate with everyone. So it's only right that we would find other means of expressing that energy.
And then I'm sorry, because now it's getting engaged. It's like, it's kind of like hijacking my emotion, like I don't want to sing. I want to play music. I play music. This is what I do. But like, I know that that's not going to change things. What really changed things was when those people stopped taking those buses in the 60s. That's what made the civil rights movement go down. It wasn't somebody, all respect to John Coltrane and Max Roach and all of these great titans. But when we play instruments and stuff like that, do they really listen to us? Or is it really getting into our communities that we come from? Because as far as I'm concerned, our communities are listening to a death frequency. They're not listening to us. They're not coming to the gigs. They're not listening to us. And it's not because we don't play hip hop. It's because they don't have access. That's what I think. So Lift Every Voice, bravo. But who is that for?
JD, do you think there's space for both a kind of work that the music can do? Duduzo talked about healing, right? And we know that in social justice spaces, we need, when people are out fighting, right, we need healing. I mean, activists,
Agreed.
Black Lives Matter movement, I think self-care has been something that we've seen really enter into social justice conversations recently. And so maybe there's a space, right, for, right, I don't want to play, I want to see these kinds of structural changes. And also we need the music, right?
We do, yeah, we do.
I think this is the perfect moment too for my last question, which I'd love for each
Oh,
of you to respond to. So, I've been reading through Robin D.G. Kelly's book on freedom dreams and thinking about freedom dreaming. And I know that freedom dreaming, especially in activist spaces, the Black Lives Matter movement has become a thing that people are really talking about as important. So one of the things that Kelly talks about in that book is, okay, if we just think about dismantling, right, and we think about tearing things down that we don't want to see, well, what about this? What about the space for building things up, right? What about the space for imagining new possibilities, for dreaming? And so I wanted to give you all the moment to just think, just to kind of like talk a little bit about what it is that you're dreaming of seeing in jazz music, in the arts, from your different perspectives and vantage points. What are you dreaming of?
well, I still wanted to say something about anthems in a South African context, because we have our own politics this side too, about what really makes an anthem. And of course, because we have a national anthem, which is called an official anthem. And of course, that is derived of
I'm having
Western.
some sound.
Yeah, it's like a hymn that is based on a Western classical sort of sonic protocol, so to speak. And there's a way in which, as we are singing, the focus in singing that national anthem becomes more about gathering, where the sonic is not truly a representation of what we would like to sing, in a sense that it's all the tools. I mean, authors such as Agao have spoken about like how, part of the colonization in the continent had to do with tonality. And of course, like we're invaded by these huge buildings and churches in themselves that were just intimidating in our spaces. But not only that, I remember as a kid and just like how the sound of a pipe organ will just invade the space anyway. So even though there were other pre-colonial sort of tonalities and ways of thinking about, song, but you couldn't escape the sound of the organ. So eventually you gave into that sound, but to be reborn inside that sound and still function as though this was your own sound. So there is that sense as well to this notion of an anthem. But also paired with that, if we think about 1976 and the Soweto uprising, there was an unofficial national anthem, which was Abdullah Ibrahim's Manenberg. This is what the guys were playing in rallies, and all the formal sort of, gatherings then will sing the national anthem. So there is a kind of like dual consciousness, so to speak, about this idea of the things that are imposed on us as being official, but they are the things that we break into. So if you think about song in an African context, it's about breaking into a song. So there is no separation actually between singing and protesting. There is no separation between thinking and singing, because it all collapses into a oneness. That's why, my grandmother, whenever she speaks of song, she says breaking into song, because song becomes that space that you break into. But this breaking is important because the song allows you to sit in a place where you are deprived in real life sometimes, you know. So if you think about what Coltrane and all of these guys were doing was very important.
Thank you for that.
Because otherwise they wouldn't have lived, actually, if it wasn't for this
you wanna get
kind of like, you know, sort of evoking a new world or an old world or a safe space. So there's a way in which we could start thinking of music not as something that we play, because that gives us too much authority that we don't have in the sound, actually. It's not about playing the music, it's about being inside the sonic as a space. So similarly, there is a song that was popular in South Africa and that has just emerged again, called Senzeni Na. And there's a way in which Blackness always asks this question. So Senzeni Na means what have we done? But we know that we've not done anything, actually. So there is a way in which this song is coming back now with this, you know, because there's been a lot of killings, women being killed in South Africa, being raped, and the women have started singing this song again. So I was just thinking in that song that actually the same word, if you don't put a question mark in the end and put an exclamation mark, it means recreate. So it's also a thing of not asking the question of what have we done, because we know we've not done anything, but like, how do we create these new worlds? How do we, and again, this question of like, what are these dreams? It's like, how do we participate in creating these dreams? Because of course, like what I went through in South Africa in the 1980s, I definitely want to protect my kids from going through that. And this is me standing up inside the song and creating a new world for them. You know, an alternative space, a space that acknowledges them, that sees them, because a lot of it is also the invisibility. And that's why this singing is important as well, because we had been invisible, but it's only through the art form jazz that like people were able to say a lot of things that were maybe impossible to say in words sometimes. So there is a way in which the legacies and the echoes of this music for me mean so much, you know. In South Africa, actually, is parallel to the US in terms of like the socio-political context. And so the way that sound is situated in the South African story is not sound in the South African story, but it's actually together. So we cannot think of the South African story or the South African, you know, sort of pain without thinking about the sonic. So I think in essence, the separation is really a foreign idea in an African context. Sound, healing, ritual, we only have one word, it's called ngoma. So even this notion of sound as being separate from the experience, sound as being separate from healing is a new idea, and it's actually very foreign to us. So sound has always been embedded. It's not something we do, but it's something we break into, we go into it.
That's beautiful, Miss Hope. Wow.
Yeah, we have to dream. JD?
Beautiful.
Miss Hope, you wanna get in there?
I was just reflecting on what he said. It's like the music or the sound is all around you, and you have to get inside of it yourself with whatever tools you have that break into it. So you and there's always a space for it. That's an amazing concept. Always a space for you to break into it, but
Yep.
it is your manipulation of your own tools of how you get in. That it's not inside you; it's outside of you, and you have to break into it. That's new thinking for me. Thank you for that.
Oh.
I would like to talk about the last question that was before us about the dream. The dream. I would like to see a place that has all the technology that we need. I mean, if I were dreaming big and there was nothing stopping the possibility of what could happen. I would like to see like a world center that engages collective Blackness, this idea of being able to break into this space that is protected by us, run by us, for us, nurtured by us, that envelops all of the entrances into this place you're talking about, where the music is.
Thanks.
In all its different forms.
Shana.
That all the different ways that the music has been broken up for commercialism can have a degree of respect from all of us. Just this space where we could do what we're doing now, but come to some collective ownership of what our ideas are about that will move us forward and protect us. That is what I would like to see. Brick and mortar space that has the wherewithal to invite us in to create ourselves to with no restrictions, and being able to communicate with other people all around the world that have that idea, that same idea, and to say it forthrightly that this is for us, whatever our mechanism would be for fundraising or whatever it would be. We have to own it and own the idea that it's for us and nobody else gets in, period. Then we have a floor that we can negotiate from our strength of what our sound is. I don't mean to block out people from all over the world. They have, but we need to, we're being stolen from. I guess that's what I'm saying. I want to be able to have a place where our music and the spiritual input, it can be protected, and the commercial input can be protected also. It's a dream.
I think your dream, Mrs. Hope, is going to be a reality. Maybe I might not see it, but the generation after us will see it, or maybe the generation after that, but that dream will be a reality. We are taking advantage of technology today, and there are people who are talking. I think my dream, which will be a reality, is that we control our spaces.
Wow.
Right.
We control our spaces, because if anything that this virus has taught us is that
touches something.
the concept of space is just an idea.
Go ahead and tell us.
Maybe it's time for a guerrilla tactic in terms of where you play. Maybe it's time to go into your community and bring nutritional value into your community. Maybe it's time to teach young people who look like you all over the world, including rural people, poor people, about the art of creativity, not so much to be a musician or a painter or a writer, but to be a critical thinker, because in the long run, the biggest problem that we're facing is the climate. And if if there aren't any critical thinkers in the world, we're in trouble. So we have to deal with this situation on a micro level. You know, new ecosystems have to be in place. And I think the powers that be realize that this world is changing. And if anything that this virus has taught us is that we have to control our spaces. That's not at the exclusion of anyone else, because you can be an ally and work with us, but we all know that we're the most disenfranchised, and the Black woman is the most disenfranchised out of all of us. And if we don't look out for ourselves, ain't nobody gonna look out for us. And that's not the exclusion of anyone who wants to help, but the concept of space. Mrs. Hope, Your dream is going to be a reality, and that is happening today all over the world, and this conversation is going down. So there's a notice that needs to be put out there in the world. We're coming together, you know, if not now, sooner or later, but it will happen. That's my reality.
That gives me hope.
Well, first, just one time for Robin Kelly. Were it not for him, I would not be sitting here. I would not think as I do. He's been that formative in my life and in the lives of so many creators and thinkers and organizers. But, you know, I'm an abolitionist, so I believe that destruction and creation go hand in hand. The destruction of those systems that seek to rob us of our life's potential, those systems that dispossess us from what is rightfully ours, those systems that terrorize us must be destroyed. Policing, white supremacy, war making, all of those things have to be destroyed. And in their place, we create those things that are meaning making for us, that sustain us, that fulfill us, that speak most righteously to our vision for what a just world would actually be. And I think alongside the critical thinkers that Mr. Allen was describing, that means when we have those critical thinkers, we're in charge of our own language. We're in charge of discourse. We speak of each other instead of being spoken of. And I think that's a really critical element in this equation. No longer can we allow other people to tell our stories because they're misrepresenting us at best. At worst, they're killing us. And so we have to be able to tell the stories in our own languages with our own tools and towards our own audiences, that we speak to each other first before we invite anyone else into that conversation, because that's where the ideas become infleshed. That's where they become embodied. That's where we know whether we're hitting the right notes or not, is when we speak to each other first. And so I want to envision a world in which we're creating alongside one another. We're challenging each other to think differently, to think better, to create differently, to create better, and to ensure, just at a very material scale, that people can survive and live based on doing what they love. All of these musicians, all musicians everywhere should be able to eat and have housing doing what they love to do. Everyone who labors should be able to live and eat based on what they do and love to do. That's the future I want for my child, that they can pursue their dream and live from it and build even a better world beyond that. So I think there's a lot of work to do, obviously. Quite often those types of projections get labeled as pipe dreams, but
Right.
like Mr. Allen, I can see that possibility, and so I want to hold on to that.
Wow. It's kind of
Whew.
emotional hearing this. I'm like, it touches something. Russell, go ahead and tell us.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of you all for speaking. I'm learning so much, you know, and as a member of the younger generation that Mr. Allen has spoken about, that, you know, Bertha is hoping to see this dream come to fruition. I often think, you know, what have our masters, whatever our forefathers and foremothers done, you know, and how can we continue what they've done and use the intellect that they've given us and use these tools to actually see these things come to fruition. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm living in a dream, because all of these things that you're speaking of are things that we're acting upon. To kind of piggyback off of Miss Redmond's, you know, love for Robin D.G. Kelly, you know, I think the prophet of all music and of all Black infiltration is Thelonious Sphere Monk. And right now I'm studying his life, and it's going to be a lifelong study of him, because he's quite arguably, you know, the greatest Black infiltrator in terms of figuring out a system that he is excluded from, figuring out a system that doesn't work for him or for his own methodology. And how did he get to point? Of course, you know, there's the struggle that he dealt with, but how do we get to a point where we find the systems that do not work, figure out how to infiltrate these systems, and figure out how to flip the script, so to speak, how to obtain these positions of power that have been, that have been so far out of our reach for so long. As a Jamaican as well, so much of our geographic location is about that kind of existence, living in the middle world, so to speak. Bob Marley, all these different incredible artists, they spent time in the US, they brought back what they've learned, whether it's Bob Marley syncretizing James Brown and bringing it back to Jamaica and figuring out how to Pan-Africanize that concept and explode it into a religious movement. That is something that I think about. That is something that is integral to my culture, is figuring out systems that are used as oppression and instead using them as systems of transformation. Figuring out how to flip the script, how to outsmart the oppressor, how to get them to do things that they, out of their own ego and their own pride, how to get them to
nice
think
to meet everyone,
that they're actually winning when they're not. And I think that is just an inherent part of being African. And it's something
all of the above.
I don't know if it's really a dream, but it's more of an action to say, we need to see what Miss Hope is saying. We need to see a United Nations for our music, for, I say our music because that's what Dizzy Gillespie referred to it as. That's why he adopted the Baha'i faith. That is why it's so integral that we as Black people come together, whether we're in Islam or Christianity or any of these things, whether we want to sing or we don't, whether we want to fight or we do not. The point is, we cannot put any of our people down anymore. We cannot use platforms to slander one another. We cannot use, right now, as plain as we see it, it's us and them. So what we need to do is infiltrate, we need to study, we need to act upon. And that is where my generation is coming into this whole game.
Hey, well, thank you. We have to start to wrap up these conversations. Thank you so much for being here and thinking through all of this with us. Jerome and I are really we're honored to have you. And also, just this series in general, we're really trying to think through some of these really messy and kind of issues that can't be contained into one conversation or one panel. So with that said, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we need to get a conversation going, and we need to act on it. Conversations are cool, but it's kind of got to put some motion on it.
Yeah, word.
Absolutely, that's the
agreed.
So I want to thank you all for being here this evening. This has been a very rich and thought-provoking conversation and food for thought. Naomi and I we feel very blessed that you all were able to be here to empty your schedules for a little over 90 minutes. We like to thank the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for sponsoring this and these conversations surrounding jazz music, our music, and Black Lives Matter. And if you are checking us out, please drop the hashtag Jazz in the Era of BLM. So thank y'all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Very enlightening.
Beautiful.